To learn more about Next Level Sound's online music production courses, please visit nextlevelsound.com.
Let me say something about referencing. Referencing, as I said before, is not like training wheels on a bicycle, where as you're learning to ride the bike, you keep your training wheels on, and then once you get really good at your bicycle, you take them off and you never put them back on again. That is not what referencing is. Referencing is something that you're going to do starting now and starting last week or last year for the rest of your journey into sound. You're always going to be referencing, and it's not something you outgrow. In fact, if you think you're going to outgrow it or you've outgrown it, you're wrong. And it doesn't work to fly free and not reference. When I first saw some of my audio mentors and heroes reference, when I was a young producer at Warner Brothers, and I worked with some of these amazing engineers, they would get to the studio and everyone would be in a rush, and there were these, multi-million-dollar budgets, literally, and everyone was stressed, and everybody thought, this next song was going to make them rich and famous, or they would have to quit the music business, and there was all kinds of stress. So everybody was always in a rush, and everybody in New York City is always in a rush. But the engineers would sit down, and before they did anything, they would just put on music for 5, 10, 3 minutes of things that they knew very well before they started to work. And so, I would get there early and have my coffee and be ready to go. And they would come in the studio, and rather than pull up the song that we were working on, they would listen to their reference tracks. And it always freaked me out because I was like, I don't want to sound like that. I don't want our drums to sound like that. I don't want our vocal to sound like that. I don't want our bass to sound like that. And they would turn around, they'd be like, relax. That's not what I'm doing. I'm just calibrating my brain, calibrating my ears, listening to something familiar before I go in and do the work. And it is a calibration. And they would, they'd calibrate themselves, they'd go to work. And then while they were working on tracks, they would flip to their reference tracks. And it would remind them of balances and width and saturation and reverb and tones and all groove and all kinds of things that would give them insight into what they needed to do to the thing that they were working on. So it wasn't that they were trying to match that snare sound or match that kick drum sound. It was just a reality check with something that was familiar, something that was successful, something that was accepted by the world, and it was used as a guide. So for us at Next Level Sound, we use reference tracks throughout the entire 6-course mixing and mastering program, but how we use them changes as we go. When we're mixing in Mixing Foundations, for those who remember, when we do our mixes, our first set of mixes, we don't have a limiter on, right? We're not mixing into a limiter, as we call it. But we do reference with commercial references. Well, look, those commercial references are mastered, they're loud, they're petrified, hopefully not in a bad way, but they're all hardened up from the limiter and the saturation and the serial compression, and they're intense. They have more power and they're more intense than a raw mix. So why do we reference while we go? Well, we turn down those references as we go and as we build our mix. This way, it constantly reminds us of where we want to be going, like a lighthouse on a dark, murky night out in the ocean, and it pulls us to the right place. Are we trying to match and beat that reference track at that point? No, we're not. We're just using it as a guide. If we listen to the same thing over and over and over and over again, you become hypnotized by the music, and you lose perspective. You can micro-focus on things that don't matter at all. And it's a recipe for doing terrible mixes. Listening to the same track without listening to something else for 8 hours is a terrible and silly way to work. And we've all done it. And you lose reality. So in Mixing Foundations, we can't beat a mastered mix yet, but we use it as a guide, and we have to turn it down as we go. Okay. In Next Level Mixing, which we're in now, we are mixing into a sparse mix bus, usually just console tape and a limiter. And the limiter is a preview for the final mastering so that we make all these adjustments through the lens of a limiter so that when we, even though we're going to take it off when we bounce our pre-master or our stems, but when we go to mastering and we put that limiter on, the mix is going to stand up and make sense with a limiter on because it's been adjusted with a limiter as a placeholder. For people who don't mix with a limiter, they get some very unpleasant surprises in mastering because they haven't previewed it and adjusted their mix with the limiter on. And once you squeeze down a little bit, and I know we're out of the loudness wars, thank goodness, but it's still, you get it changes the relationships in the mix. And you're like, oh, where's my beautiful mix? This mastering engineer destroyed my mix. That I don't like that person. And it's not their fault. It's actually the mixer's fault because they didn't preview with the limiter. Now, when we A/B reference in Next Level Mixing, we still can't beat that master because that master is mastered. And our mix is just a mix in progress with a simple mix bus. So we need to turn it down so when we switch between it, it doesn't freak us out. It doesn't blow us out of the water. And so we turn down the reference, and then we make it so that when we switch, we don't feel demoralized or not worthy, and it's still helpful. But we know we can't match the intensity and the power yet. Then we get to mastering. And in mastering, now we go toe-to-toe with these reference tracks, and we don't turn them down. And we try to match the quality, the width, the power, the loudness, everything. We use it extremely literally, but that's through the entire production, mixing, and mastering cycle. We see that reference tracks are with us the entire way, right? So even though we use them differently depending on what stage we're at. Now, I know some engineers who say, you know what, every song is unique and I don't need to reference because I know my room and I don't want to be influenced by anything and I just like to fly free and just feel it. Let me tell you something. That doesn't work. It does not work. People think it works and it don't work. And when I go to Graduates Club on Mondays and Fridays and we do live feedback and we listen to stuff, I can tell who referenced and I can tell who didn't. And anytime we get something played that's really, really weird, we're just like there's no kick drum or the kick drum is 10 dB too loud, I know that person didn't reference. And I don't even have to ask, but I do ask just to rub it in. I was like, did you reference? No. Yeah, all right. Well, that's why it sounds crazy and weird. When you reference, it doesn't mean you're trying to copy or match that art. It means that you are reality checking and giving yourself a break from what you're concentrating on so that you're not micro focusing on the trees and you have a sense of the forest and the trees, right? Okay, so that is my sermon about the importance of referencing. It's not something that you do and you don't do. You always do it. And a couple times, as a final thought, where I was like, oh, I don't need to do this. I got this. I did my worst work, and I was embarrassed that I didn't follow my own rules. I didn't take my own medicine, and I paid for it. And I had to go back and redo it. So even when I have broken my own rules a couple times over the last decade, it didn't work. Okay, I've made my point.
To learn more about Next Level Sound's online music production courses, please visit nextlevelsound.com.